Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is the Trade Station Masterclass. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for Trade Station Securities. And today we're going to talk about strategies, a particular feature of strategy trading that is built into TradeStation, which is trade sizing and pyramiding, and also how you can program strategies to calculate trade size programmatically based on certain conditions. So we're going to take a look at all those settings in strategy trading so that you have an idea and understand how to use those features, okay? Before we get started, the usual disclosures, just keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only. It is not a recommendation of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone, and past historical performance, which we're going to take a look at today in many strategies, that historical performance is no guarantee of future results. For additional information on our disclosures, just go to www.tradestation.com/important-information. And Manolo has shared that link with us here in the chat as well, if you want to jump right into it. Manolo is my colleague. He's going to be moderating the chat and providing us any files or any links that we referenced throughout the presentation, okay? Thank you guys for being here. Let me go ahead and switch over to my TradeStation platform. And here we have a chart of Ford. This is a chart of Ford going back. Let me see, what did I set my chart to? I'm gonna go to edit symbol here for a moment to take a look at the historical amount of data. And notice here that I've set my chart to 10 years back. 10 years back on a daily time frame. And the strategy that I have here on my chart is one of the strategies that is supplied with TradeStation called the price channel. Now, at this stage of the strategy, I don't have the study that goes along with the strategy. A lot of times I always suggest, if you're going to be looking at a strategy, always have the indicator in there as well, because it enhances your visual. You can understand why the strategy is taking a certain action. Why is it entering? Why is it exiting? Why is it long? Why is it short? So that visual understanding comes along with having the study along with the strategy. Right now, I only have the strategy. So you see, signals being generated based on the same study, but you don't have that visual of the breakout. So let's go ahead and take care of that first. I'm going to go here to studies and add a study. And I'm going to combine or use the price channel strategy. I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago on price channel. I'm not sure, Manolo, I know that I sometimes catch you off guard, but if you have this presentation handy, the one on price channel, I think it also includes Keltner channels and Bollinger Bands, but it explains a little bit about how the price channel is calculated. So I'm going to add it here on my chart. And the basis of this strategy is simple and very straightforward. The strategy keeps track of the highest high and the lowest low for a particular period of time. And by default, I think it looks at 20 bars. The strategy that I'm using, it's also looking at 20 bars. So what it's looking to do is whenever there is a breakout on the upper band or the lower band, it takes a trade. So whenever there's a break on the upper band, it takes a long trade. And whenever there's a break on the bottom band, it takes a short trade. Very simple concept, very straightforward. This strategy, out of the box, if I look at the strategy performance report, it's barely profitable. It's not a complete strategy. In fact, I was looking for, I did spend, a few minutes trying to find a symbol that would give me some decent results. Because for the most part, this strategy, the price channel strategy, since it's not a strategy or a complete strategy, you just get negative results for many symbols across the board. So I did find a symbol that at least gave us a good starting point. And a lot of times I don't like to start with a negative strategy, but it is what it is. Now, the concept today is not about finding a winning strategy or finding the holy grail, but to show you some of the functionality that is part of TradeStation in terms of strategy trading. All right. Dave, I'm not sure if it's referred to as a Donchian channel. In fact, I've never heard of it as a Danshan channel. Not sure if anybody here has additional information on that. You know, I think it's the first time that I hear about. I mean, the name sounds familiar, but there may be differences in the calculation. Not sure about this, Dave. But the price channel, as I pointed out, is just a highest high, lowest low for the past 20 bars, and then we're looking for breakouts. If that fits the description of the Danshan channel, then it may be the same thing. Okay, so profitable strategy, barely profitable strategy. Let's just point that out. We have a total of 78 trades in a time span of 10 years. That's not that many trades. I'm not sure if I would be sitting, straight for 10 years waiting for 78 trades to happen, but this is the nature of this strategy and we're going to work with it. Okay. So by just having a strategy in place and being able to pull up a strategy performance report, you know that signals are being generated. Now, if you notice the signals, you have blue arrows for long entries, red arrows for short entries. And every signal will have a positive number or a negative number, which refers to the trade size. Now, I didn't specify how many shares I wanted to trade or contracts. I didn't specify, if I wanted to go long or short, because that's all built into the strategy. If you don't specify all those elements, the strategy will do whatever it's designed to do. And by default, the strategy trades 100 shares if you're an equities symbol. If you're in a futures symbol or an options symbol, the default is going to be one contract. So that's just the default. So a lot of times, we create a strategy and we don't specify how many shares we want to trade, but the strategy will just pick what the default is. In fact, let's go ahead and here and pull up the easy language code for this price channel long entry so you know exactly what I mean. Okay, so the buy command, which is right here on line 18, it buys next bar at the highest high for the length period. And it adds a point to it because it just wants to confirm that you've actually gotten a breakout. So it's not really looking for a price to be traded at the level of the price channel, but to exceed that level by at least 1 point. But it's interesting that in this buy command, you have no mention of how many shares to trade. So there is a default size that gets traded every time you use a strategy. On TradeStation, if you want to access that information, that's going to be available under Studies, Edit Strategies. And under Edit Strategies, we go over here to Properties for All. Properties for All is a place where you can set strategy settings for every strategy component that you bring inside the chart. And here on the bottom right side, we have a box for trade size. And it says in parentheses, if not specified by strategy, which is the case of the price channel. But if you do specify how many shares you want to trade inside the strategy, then the easy language is going to override whatever setting you specify here in properties. So yes, the easy language takes precedence over whatever it's mentioned here, which is something to keep in mind, okay? But if you don't specify how many shares you want to trade, no big issue, because here you can control how many shares to trade. So if I do a direct change here and I say, well, I want to trade 1,000 instead of 100, because maybe it's a cheap stock, this is Ford, currently trading at $11.83. If I want to increase my trade size to 11 and I click OK, then it does that precisely. You can see how the signals change from 100 and negative 100 to 1,000 and negative 1,000 accordingly. If I go back to the strategy performance report, you're going to see that the profit factor remains unchanged. So we're not really changing the profitability of the strategy in terms of percent profitability, but we're just increasing the number of shares, and that of course dramatically increases your total net profit because you're trading more, not because it's making it a better strategy. Let's just keep that straight. Okay, but it's a direct effect on what the strategy is trading every single time it generates an order. On my trade list, the very first trade of my list, this is trade number 1. You can see that The profit and loss is $300. If we change that size back to 100, let me go ahead and double click on one of the signals here. One of the nice things is that I can keep the strategy performance report open and still go into the format strategies. If I go here to properties for all, let's just add one more zero here. So instead of trading 1,000, we're going to trade 10,000. And I click OK and OK. Then you can see that that first trade goes from $300 to $3,000 loss. So just going to exponentially increase or decrease your net profit or net loss, depending on the size that you're trading. But the profitability in terms of profit factor stays the same. We're still making 1.29. That means that we're making $1.29 for every dollar that we lose, which is not good. It's barely making profits. In fact, this particular strategy that I'm adding here has no cost associated with it, and it's expecting perfect fills, which very rarely happens. We've all traded the markets, and we know how unpredictable they are. And a lot of times, you are expecting to get filled at a particular price, and you don't. But the strategy doesn't really factor that in, and that is why when you format the strategy and you go to properties for all, you can include things such as commissions, if you're paying any commissions, slippage. Slippage is exactly what I referred to as you're expecting a particular price, but you get something totally different in the real market. That's called slippage. From the time the market hits the exchange, depending on availability, especially if it's a market order that is generated, anything can happen, and there's a little bit of a wiggle room or a fudge factor that affects your fill. So sometimes that's referred to as position slippage, and you can factor that into your profitability, and that way have more realistic results. So yes, so I was pointing to that because we have a 1.9 profit factor, but then I haven't factored in any costs associated with trading this strategy. But let's talk about trade size a little bit more. I'm going to come over here to properties for all, because in addition to having a fixed, shared, or contracts, I also have the ability to do USD per trade or US dollars per trade. And right here, the default value is $10,000. It's going to round down to the nearest 100 shares. And the minimum number is going to be 100. So let's go ahead and see what this is going to do if we leave it the way it is. Okay, so $10,000 round down to the nearest 100 shares. Just going to click OK and OK. So that, of course, changes the numbers here a little bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at trade size. I'm going to go to the trade list here. And there is a place where I see the size right here. Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. Let me go ahead and make this window bigger. So yeah, 600 shares. The price is $15.46. So if we bring up the calculator, now this is my calculator, and I say $10,000, and I divide those $10,000 by the price of the security, which is in this case, let's say 1616, that first trade. That gives you 618 point and extra change. Of course, we're not going to be trading fractions of a share. And if you remember the strategy properties, it says that it's going to round down to the nearest 100 lot. So instead of trading 618 shares, it's going to trade 600. And that's the reason why you have 600, 600, and 600 from the beginning of the data point. If we go and scroll, we may find other quantities. For example, at this point, it's trading 1,200, 1,400, 1,600 because it's sensitive to the change in prices. As the price increases, the lower the quantity. As the price decreases, the higher the quantity it can trade, because every single trade is going to be of at least $10,000. Very interesting, right? Now, if you really want to trade odd lots, you just have to go here into the strategy properties. So if, for example, if I really wanted to trade the 618 shares rather than just the even 600, I can do that by coming over here and saying, round down to the nearest one share or contract. If I do that and I click OK, then you can see the quantities that it's trading right here: 618, 630, 608, 628, 595. So it has a little bit more variability in the number of shares that it's trading because you're rounding down to the nearest one share, which is something you can do. Now, so I'm just showing you the different functionality or different settings so you can set your strategy to trade the shares that you want. Okay, let me go ahead and back in there. I'm getting a question here in the chat from Shinya. Can we set the maximum number of bars studyable reference to 200 or more to begin with? Because it is annoying to change the setting from 50 to 200 or more every time. Shinya, yes, you can set the default to 200 if you want to. By the way, we're not talking about maximum number of bars studyable reference, but it is something that you have to be aware of. And the setting that Shinya is talking about is over here on the bottom left side of properties for all. It says maximum number of bars studyable reference. And yes, it is set to 50 by default. And you can set this to 200. And now, you may be onto something because strategies, I think, start at 50. Now, can I change that setting as a default? As you can see, there's no set as default button here, but is there one? I'm maybe going into a side on a tangent here, but I wanted to maybe address the question. And for my own curiosity, let's go here to settings on the chart and go into preferences. And here under strategy, no, not here. So that's a good question. I don't think that can be set as a default. So this 50, it always defaults to 50 for strategies, but you can change it if you want. Just be mindful that, 200, it's a lot of data. And if the strategy you're using or if the indicator you're using is not using that amount of data, you're still not using that data for display. So remember that the amount of data that you put in there is reserved for calculations, and you won't see any strategy signals in that period, which is probably what you want. But I don't think it can be set as a default. Okay, so unfortunately. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to properties for all. And we talked about, rounding it down to the nearest one share. This is the minimum number of shares that will trade. Now, if you go to something more expensive, let me go ahead and switch the strategy over to, let me close the strategy performance report. I'm going to pull up, for example, Microsoft. If I pull up Microsoft and I look at the strategy here, you can see that the signals disappear. Why do they disappear? Because you're asking the strategy to trade $10,000 worth of shares and have a minimum trade size of 100. If I take a look at the price here of Microsoft, currently trading at $280, that's where the current price is. And if the minimum trade size is 100 shares, that means that the trade would cost $28,000. Of course, that's way over the $10,000 that we specified inside the strategy. Even at the lowest point of the strategy, the price of Microsoft was about $215, which is still about a $21,000 trade if you were trading 100 shares. So when I go here, and that's the reason why it seems like nothing is happening here on this strategy, because you told it that the minimum trade size was going to be 100. Let's go back there, edit strategies, properties for all. This is my amount that I want to trade, 10,000 shares, but here's what's blocking me: minimum number. So it's going to try to trade at least 100 shares. And when it can't trade 100 shares for less than 10,000, it won't generate that trade. That's why it seems like the strategy disappeared on me. Now, if I bring this number down to 1, Now it's going to round it down to the nearest one share, and it's going to trade at least one share if it has to. Let's go ahead and click OK and OK. And then you see how the trades come back. Now, right here, this trade is 36 shares of Microsoft on the short side. Then we have 39 down here. We have 40 over here. So you can see how the strategy is adjusting to the trade size settings that we specified. Does that make sense? So on higher priced securities, just be aware that your dollar amount works as a limitation for the strategy as well. If it cannot, if it cannot meet your sizing conditions, then it would just won't generate the trade for you. Let's go back in there. All right. And I'm going to go to properties for all. And if it's fixed shares or contracts, this is USD per trade. It's interesting because it uses a specific dollar amount. And if it cannot, trade within those boundaries, it won't generate the trade, which is probably what happens in your real accounts. If you're trading a strategy and all of a sudden, you're unable to fulfill a trade because of capital limitations, it sounds a little bit more realistic than having, say, okay, I want a fixed share contracts and I want to set this to 100. That's fine. If I set this to a fixed 100 and I click OK, my strategy back test, of course, it's going to look very, very nice at an even 100 shares. This is, of course, Microsoft on a daily time frame. You can see how the profitability is negative, but sometimes it's not realistic, because if you look at your trade list, yeah, it is trading 100 shares at a time, but that trade is costing you. Let me see if there's a cost column here. There's no cost column, but we can do the math. So at this price, when Microsoft was $37, 100 shares was 3,760. Not that bad. But in today's prices, when we look at 100 shares priced at, $245, we know that trade is $24,000 just for 100 shares of Microsoft. So yes, your account may not have capital to put in that trade, or maybe you have your capital, set on other securities, and you probably don't want to hold a position that is so expensive. Maybe, you want to trade options instead. Whatever it is, a lot of times we have these capital limitations that you can also use as a sizing element in your strategy, and say, I don't want you to spend more than this amount of dollars on a single trade. Very interesting setting inside of the strategy properties. Now let's talk a little bit about pyramiding, which is another component of strategy elements, which is very interesting. And it does allow you to continue to increase your position size if the strategy continues to generate the same signal. Because the strategy is all based on signals. If the signal is met, it generates the trade. But what if after generating that trade, we get the exact same signal? What do? I mean, we know that we are probably in the right direction with that trade that we took. But are you willing to maybe trade again in that same direction and increase your position size? So if you started off with 100 shares and you get the same signal one more time, would you be willing to trade another 100 on that same direction? But that's exactly what you can turn on the strategy side, which we call, where the industry calls pyramiding, where you start increasing your position size as the market goes in the direction that you are expecting. So let's go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to come over here and format this strategy. Go to properties for all. And that setting combines these two boxes. The one that we have down here, where we have a fixed number of shares of 100. And over here, we are turning this checkbox on that is under position limits. And you say that inside parentheses, it says for pyramiding strategies only. I'm going to allow up to 50 entry orders in the same direction as the currently held position. Now let's go ahead and understand this, because that 50 just means that you are allowing the strategy to generate 50 orders in the same direction. So if each order has 100 shares, if you multiply that times 50, now you can potentially end up with a position of 5,000 shares. Now that's massive. So always keep an eye on this 50 because you may want to reduce that number or not. If you're trading something cheap and you're willing, to go up to 5,000 shares, that's fine. You may want to even increase that number. But, for a security like Microsoft, where 1,000 shares, and we're talking about close to $300,000, times 5, it's over $1 million for just one 5,000 share position. Then you're going to have to, think about that a little bit closer just to make sure that that's what you want. I'm not saying that you're unable to trade that, because you may have an account that has, millions of dollars in it, and you may want to trade 5,000 shares of Microsoft. But, that's something to always keep in mind on that little number right there. For my strategy back test, I'm going to set this to 3. I'm going to allow my strategy to trade 3 times in the same direction as, in fact, I'm going to probably do 5, just so we can see more of that happening on the chart. Now, there's 2 other radio buttons that I'm going to be looking at. Yes, in this case, pyramiding is kind of just increasing your position size. Let's take a look. We're going to take a look at, variability on trade size based on a condition, so that, you can change your size based on calculation. But for now, this is just increasing your position size and then closing it all together when the market goes in the opposite direction. We're going to take a look at that. There's 2 radio buttons that we have to decide which one we want applied to our strategy. The first one, when the order is generated by a different entry order, or regardless of the entry that generated the order. Well, how many entry orders do we have in our strategy? We have 1 entry on the long side, and we have 1 entry on the short side. But they're different entries, right? One is long and the other is short. So when we say, when the order is generated by a different entry order, we're kind of limiting the behavior to just pyramid if we have a signal that is generated by a different strategy, And this is something to think about, because if you are in a long trade, right? Like over here where my cursor is, I'm on a long trade. And you can see over here that we have additional penetrations on the upper band where the price channel strategy could generate an additional trade. But if you put this radio button on when the order is generated by a different entry order, it will ignore these, because all these that are following my entry are the same entry signal. And if I leave it here, it's looking for a different strategy to have generated that additional entries to increase the position size. So the default is regardless of the entry that generated the order. So if a strategy feels that another 100 shares need to be filled, then it'll do exactly that, no matter, which signal is generating the trade. I'm going to click OK here. I'm going to click OK and OK. All right, so we get these fan-looking trades because we are allowing the strategy to trade more as the condition becomes true. So on this trade that we were pointing to earlier, we can see that the initial 2 trades, and I say 2 trades because I see 2 dotted blue lines, the initial 2 entries were profitable, but the last 3 were not. You can see that there's a red line, meaning that those are losing trades. And I see a total of 5 different lines because the strategy was able to enter up to 5 times, which is exactly what I entered in that little box that limits the number of entries that are generated. But on this second trade, on this following trade, where we see the short entry, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional entries, and they're all profitable. So in some trades, it makes sense. In this particular area, it made sense to go and enter more as the market went down and penetrated the bottom band. It only does it up to 5 times, and all those 5 trades were profitable right here. Now, of course, I want to see if this made a impact on my strategy performance. Let's go here. I wasn't looking at Microsoft before. I think I was looking at, was I looking at Verizon? I think I was looking at Verizon. All right, so, and I went to data and strategy performance report. Okay, I think, let me turn it off for a moment and then back on to see if this is the report that I was on. I'm not sure. I know that when we first started, I was having a profit factor of 1.22, and I wasn't sure it was Verizon or was it something else. I have a bad memory for these type of things, but it's okay. I mean, we can start from here. This is Verizon. Very bad, it was Ford. That's right. Thank you for that, Dave. Let's go to Ford. There we go, the 1.29. And let's see what effect it would have on the strategy if we turn on pyramiding. I want to allow up to 5 additional entry orders, regardless of the entry that generated the trade. That, kind of had an effect on the negative side because my profit factor now is 1.23. So it dropped 6 hundredths of a point. But we can see the same behavior in the background right here, where the strategy is taking additional trades. Right here on this first short trade, the strategy kept on breaking that bottom band, and it kept on taking short trades for me up until this point where it actually reversed my position and all the trades were exited. Okay. So is pyramiding something that you should use all the time? Well, depends, it depends on the strategy that you're using. I would look at, and very carefully look at the performance results and how they get impacted by me turning on pyramiding. A lot of times it works in my favor, but a lot of times it works against me. If I were to increase the number here, let's say we go here and increase this number to 10. So if we increase the number to 10, our maximum position size is going to be 1,000 shares. For Ford, it may not be a big deal, but let's go ahead and see what effect it has on my strategy. If I go here to the strategy performance report, and that's even worse. You can see that on this particular strategy, for this particular symbol, it makes no sense to turn on pyramiding. However, it is good as a strategy developer that you are aware that you can turn on this feature that can continue to trade in the same direction of the currently held position. All right. Can pyramiding be used for ES futures? Yes, definitely. This strategy feature or functionality is available for stocks, it's available for futures, and it's also available for options. I don't see a lot of people trading strategies on options because of some of the limitations that are inherent of options. For example, the amount of historical data. Sometimes you don't have enough historical data to have a proper historical backtest or a proper, strategy at all, because the strategy needs data in order to calculate. And sometimes options are very lightly traded. So for the most part, somebody that's using strategies and developing strategies is for the most part using stocks or futures, but definitely you can use strategies and pyramiding on futures. All right. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to go to @ES here. Okay. On @ES, this is a strategy that it changed the, okay, when I changed the symbol, notice that it didn't change the size. And I laugh because I'm looking here at the net profit, and it says here that I made $7.4 million. But of course, there's no cost associated with the strategy that I'm trading. It's still set to 100 contracts in this case. So trading 100 contracts of the S&P E-mini, you need a big account to be able to trade that. but you can see some of these numbers, but the profit factor, it's kind of breaking even, 1.07. So even though it says here that I made $7.4 million, out of the gross profit and the gross loss, it makes no sense. We made $116 million to lose $109 million, and with a profit factor of 107. So this is not counting, commissions, not counting slippage, which would make this strategy backtest completely negative. But this is a 1.07. Let me come over here, remove pyramiding, set the contracts to 1. And there you go. So we went up to 1.17. Still not a good strategy. I wouldn't, call this a complete strategy whatsoever. But the functionality is there. Now, let me show you one way that you can actually control trade size with easy language. In fact, I'm going to share a link with everyone here. Manolo, when you can, please share that link with the zip folder. You're going to see it right here in the chat in just a moment. It's going to be a zip. There we go. Thank you, Manolo. It's going to be a zip folder. Let me just click it here from the chat to see if it works. It does work. So it goes right into my downloads. It didn't actually open anything for me. So just be aware that when you click on that link, it automatically downloads the file for you. So you have to access your downloads folder. And when you open it, it's going to have an ELD inside of it. The ELD is a custom strategy that uses a calculated trade size. Let's go ahead and open it up. So double click. Once you save the file to your computer, you can double click on the file so that it imports that strategy into your trade station. If you're having issues, doing it, let me know, and we'll walk you through the steps. But the strategy, let me go ahead and remove all this, uses strategy equity to calculate the size that you're going to be trading. Let me show you what we mean by that. In fact, I removed the price channel. I think the strategy that I'm going to show you uses price channel as its concept. So let me go here to price channel and put it on again. But I believe instead of 20, it uses 21 bars as the default. All right, so I leave the price channel, and I'm going to go to studies, not add study. I'm going to go to add strategy. So again, studies, add strategy group. I'm sorry. I'm clicking way too fast and I'm not being accurate. Studies, add strategy. And the strategy that I'm going to put on is the one that is custom, add MC. It's called add MC, MC for masterclass, equity trade size. Let's go ahead and put it on. I'm going to come back to the inputs in just a moment, but let's go ahead and click OK. And it puts a strategy right here. Let me change the symbol here to Verizon. All right, and we're going to turn it into a, you see a 5-minute chart going back 3 months. Is it a daily chart? Just interesting, just different settings here. So let me go here. Okay, let's just leave it the way it is. Again, it's not really the numbers, because this is not the idea here is not to give you a strategy that works. The idea here is to show you some of the things you can do on your side, to develop a strategy that you can work with. So the strategy itself, let's go ahead and pull up the strategy in the easy language development environment. I've opened up mine. There's a few lines of code here. There's a total of 39 lines of code, but I wanted to show you how the code is set up so that we can understand how trade size is calculated. Let's look at the inputs. You have an initial trade size, and there's some notes here added to each one of the inputs. This is your starting point. So whenever the strategy starts trading, the initial trade size is 1,000 shares. Maximum trade size is 2,000, and minimum trade size is 100. Of course, all these inputs are editable, okay? Profit, it uses a profit stop loss amount set to 500. The profit and stop loss amount, the name implies that it's used for both profit and stop loss. So we're going to use the same amount for a profit target and a stop loss. But these two values are important. You have to adjust them accordingly to the symbol you're trading. This amount is also something that you need to adjust based on the symbol that you're trading, because 500 may be okay for some symbols, but not okay for others. And we're going to take a look at how the profit targets and the stop losses are being generated here so that we can have an understanding. We have two variables, trade size and trade size adjustment. And here in this piece of green, it provides you an explanation on how the strategy handles trade size. It's going to look at the equity that the strategy is at the moment, whether it is a positive or a negative number. Whenever it has positive equity, it's going to increase your position size based on how much money or how much more money you're making. Now, if the equity starts dropping and it goes to the negative side, then it'll have the opposite effect. It'll still calculate it, but based on the amount you're losing, it's going to reduce the number of shares that the strategy is trading. It's a way to also manage risk, you know? So it's an interesting concept, and this is the way that it's calculated. On line 18 to line 21 is where the core calculation of the trade size is happening. Take a look at that blue word, net profit. This is looking at net profit from trade to trade. You close the trade, you made $1,000, and now it's going to compare that to the setting profit stop loss. This is what you have up here. If it's greater than that number, right, or the net profit is less than that number. So look, take a look at what is happening here. It's looking at both sides. If you have a net profit greater than 500, or you have a net profit that is less than negative 500, looking at both areas, then the trade size adjusts. That's where the magic happens. It's going to take the net profit, whatever amount of money you're making or losing, divided by the profit stop loss, which is up here, the 500. And whatever you get, it's going to be multiplied by 100. So let's take one example so that it makes sense in our head. We did say that, let's suppose that our net profit is $1,000, right? It takes that $1,000 and divides it by the profit stop loss. Now, what value is that? That's the 500 up here. So if you take 1,000 and you divide it by 500, you get 2. Yeah, 1,000 divided by 500 is 2. And if you take that 2 and you multiply it by 100, guess what happens? You have a trade size adjust of 200, and that's what gets, traded. So your trade size, take a look. The trade size is what you started off with the trade size adjustment. So if your initial trade size was 1,000, which we saw in the inputs, it's going to add the 200, and that is going to be your new trade size based on the equity you made. Pretty cool, huh? Now, of course, if the trade size is more than the maximum, then just trade the maximum. Or if the trade size is less than the minimum, then just trade the minimum. This is a way for you to set those two boundaries, because this calculation can be anything. I mean, your strategy can be a very good strategy and it can start making more and more and more money, but you're not going to continue increasing and increasing. There's always going to be a ceiling that you have to set and say, if it reaches this amount, if it reaches this ceiling, then this is my maximum trade size. The same happens on the downside, minimum trade size. Your minimum trade size cannot go negative. If we are adjusting the trade size here on the negative side as well, making this a minus the adjustment, if we don't set a minimum trade size, this calculation is going to throw a negative number of shares to trade, and it's going to generate an error at the moment that the order is generated. So we have a minimum trade size. All right. So when it comes to the trade itself, the order that is generated, this is using lowest low and highest high, similar to what the price channel does. And notice that it says buy next bar, trade size. So this is the syntax that you would use if you want to specify the number of shares you want to trade. And we said at the very beginning of the presentation that whenever you specify your trade size inside of easy language, this overrides anything that you've set up in the properties of the strategy. So this takes more importance than what you have on the property settings. So the trade size is this variable that gets calculated every single bar. So you have a potential of trading different sizes every time that an order gets generated. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of examples on the chart. And I think that's going to take a little bit more, it's going to make a little bit more sense. Also notice right here at the bottom, we have my stop loss and my profit target, which are both set to the profit stop loss amount of 500. So if the strategy makes $500, it'll stop me with a target. And if it loses more than $500, it'll stop me with a stop. Okay, so going back to the strategy, I'm also going to add, since this strategy is all based on equity, I'm going to add an indicator that comes built into TradeStation that plots equity at the bottom of the chart. And sometimes it makes a lot of sense on how the strategy is reacting to that equity. I'm going to go here to add study. The name of the study, it should be part of your list of studies, called strategy equity. So it's right here, strategy equity. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to go here to the very beginning of the chart, because I want you guys to take a look at my strategy equity. Whenever you're at the beginning of the chart, the strategy equity always starts at 0. Once it takes that first trade, that's when you start seeing activity on that strategy equity indicator. And what it's plotting you on the red histogram is what the strategy is looking at, the net equity. The white line is your open equity. So as the trade is open and it's updating in real time, you have a real-time calculation of your P&L. But the strategy is looking at the net profit, which is the histogram. From trade close to trade close, it knows what the net strategy profit is. And based on that, it's going to calculate either an increment or a decrease on the size that you're trading. So from the very first trade, let me open this up a little bit more. From the very first trade, which was a short trade, the strategy generated a short trade because it broke the upper band. In fact, this is a fade strategy. This is different than the price channel strategy. In the price channel strategy, if it broke the upper band, it would have taken a long trade, thinking that the price will continue on the same direction. On this strategy that is custom, it fades it. So if it breaks the upper band, it actually takes a short trade. That's why you have these red arrows on the top side of the channel, because it's trying to fade it, thinking that the price will just bounce and go in the opposite direction. So my first trade is a short trade, and the initial amount that it traded is 1,000. Now, if we look at the strategy equity down here, on that first trade, my closed equity was 130. I'm looking at the bottom of the data tips window where you see the 130 in red. That's my closed equity. On the third trade, my closed equity was $470. And that's why, the trade size is unchanged. Remember that we're looking for something that is higher than 500 or lower than minus 500. It is not until this level right here, It is not after this long trade that our closed equity is 830. Everybody sees that on the data tips window? The 830 in red numbers is my closed equity. So at this point, if we go back to the formula, if we go back here and right here, we take the net profit, which is 830, divided by the profit stop loss. Now, that could be 830 divided by 500, which is my profit stop loss. That gives you 1.66. You know, it's not an even number, but then if you multiply this by 100, we get 166. But notice that it says round. It's going to use the rounding calculation in order to round that 166. I'm sure it's going to round it up if it uses the rounding techniques, right? I think so. Let's see. Let me go over here and go back to the TradeStation chart. And after this, you can see that it generated a short trade. You see the quantity right here? The quantity is exactly 1,200. So it took that, you know, $830 that it made. It calculated the trade size and it added 200 shares more to my position because it was able to make that profit. Interesting, huh? And as we see after that, let me see. After that, it made a little bit more profit right here. In fact, the equity went up to 1,268. Notice how the quantity here increased to 1,300. So this is the way that you can calculate the trade size and let the strategy, you know, programmatically set the trade size for you. At this point, you know, when the strategy is, or the closed equity right here is 3,100. Let me make the calculation here. So let me bring up the calculator. So we have 3,101 to be more exact on equity. This is the equity on the strategy. We divide it by 500. It gives us 6.2. Now let's multiply that by 100. It gives us 620 shares. That is the adjustment. So 620, if we round this, we're not going to round it up. We're going to round it down to 600. So if we look at the trade right here, you can see that the short trade that was taken right after that calculation is 1,600 shares. So very interesting way of calculating your trade size programmatically. So keep that strategy handy if you want to look at an example on how trade size can be calculated in easy language. You can take that, you know, and be a little bit more elaborate and bring in other calculations. That's just a starting point. But it does, you know, it does show you all the different things you can do with trade size, starting with the strategy properties where you can set a fixed amount. You can set a specific number of dollars to trade. And if you do it inside of easy language, we know that easy language is going to override those settings and strategy properties. But that's, I mean, pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about today, which is trade sizing and a little bit of pyramiding. We used that pyramiding and it didn't quite, you know, work well for a strategy. But I know there are some strategies that are that receive that pyramiding very well, and it seems to work well in some instances. It didn't work well for us though. But the feature's there. Please use it if you're developing a strategy. There's nothing better than turning on a feature and finding out that that's going to be benefiting our strategy. So that's it. Thank you guys for joining me today. Check out the events calendar that Manolo is sharing with everyone here. And thank you for your support of the masterclass. And I hope to see you in a future class. Have a wonderful day. Take care.